Astonishing Legends would like to thank New Mood, Squarespace, Skylight Frame, Wondrium, Bespoke Post, Current, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
We invited Terry Lovelace to come on Astonishing Legends 2 years ago to talk about his book, Incident at Devil's Den. It's hard to believe we've released 66 episodes since then. It was such a bone-chilling story that it feels much more recent to us in a lot of ways. Terry, a former felony prosecutor and now certified healthcare risk manager, is a compelling and believable eyewitness, and we're not the only ones who think that. His episode elicited more emails than nearly all of the shows preceding it, and that tracks because we're not the only ones getting emails and letters. Terry was too. And he collected, read, and saved all of them. Tonight, Terry is back with us. He's written a new book with significantly more details about what happened to him and his friend Toby all those years ago. He's also included 30 of the stories those folks sent him, which resonated the most with him personally. This new book is called Devil's Den: The Reckoning, and much like Incident at Devil's Den, it is enthralling. When someone has a personal experience like this, what happens after it's over? What is the aftermath? Oftentimes, there's so much more than just the incident itself. There are ongoing attempts to make sense of it and deal with the fallout for the people affected by it and the damage done to the survivors. It must be quite a thing to go through an abduction experience, and quite something else to hear from people worldwide that have had something similar happen to them too.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
The extraterrestrials chose to appear to me as circus monkeys. They chose to appear in a way I would find less threatening and adults would find impossible to believe. Paraphrased from page 81 of Terry Lovelace's new book, Devil's Den: The Reckoning.
Join us tonight for part one of our two-part series with returning guest Terry Lovelace.
And we're back.
That we are, folks, and it feels good to be back. You didn't think the scary stories were going to end with Halloween, did you?
Ooh.
Well, we have a few very quick announcements to make tonight. The first one being that I have to make a correction to something I said in The Exorcist Part 3.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Yeah, this is entirely on me. This is my fault. I had said that our guest, Sarah, from Sarah and the Spider Woman, had been diagnosed with anti-NMDAR encephalitis, which was not the case. To be more accurate, what happened was that when she heard Father Duffy on our show talking about thyroid disorders, she had that looked into, and her doctors determined that she had Graves' disease. Graves' disease is also an autoimmune disorder, but the symptoms it generates are very similar to the anti-NMDAR encephalitis and other similar conditions. Still, that was my mistake, so I wanted to correct it. Hearing the episode still saved her life, and it still all tracks back to my favorite murder, and then our guest as well, Father Duffy, but the cause of her issue was different. In any event, the diagnosis she requested helped to save her. So apologies, Sarah, if you're still listening, for misrepresenting that, and a huge shout out to Kirsten on Twitter for pointing that out.
Yeah, one question here. What is the R in NMDA receptor encephalitis?
No, it's receptor. When the R is there, it's part of the acronym.
Ah.
It was NMDA, but now they've made the R part of the acronym. So you can say NMDA receptor encephalitis.
Okay.
Actually, anti. You can say anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, or you can say anti-NMDAR encephalitis and leave receptor out because the receptor becomes the R in the acronym for the NMDAR.
I see. And no better instance than why you should never, ever take medical advice from us.
Yeah, I'm going to go with any advice, really. Oh, and one other quick announcement. We were just on Talk is Jericho with one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Chris Jericho, to talk about the Beast of Gévaudan. So check that out on his podcast, which again is called Talk is Jericho. We'll have a link to it in our show notes, but you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. That dude is prolific. Aside from being a world championship wrestler, he is also the lead singer of the heavy metal band Fozzy, and they rock. They're actually on tour right now. Anyway, we had a great time over there, so check it out.
All right, folks. Well, we got a great show for you tonight, so it's time to welcome our guest, Terry Lovelace, back to Astonishing Legends.
So, Terry, this is a real pleasure having you back on the show. The last time we had you on, I have to be honest, I was not sure how your story was going to be received. It is such an intense story. I would describe it. I feel like the word that I think of when I think about your history and what you've been through, the word that pops up the most is disconcerting. It's very disconcerting.
Let's be honest here. Scott was afraid, and with good reason, how people would react. But I was trying to convince him the overall factor that I think made us want to tell your story, wanted you to tell your story, was your credibility and the way you spoke. And the first interview I heard with you, I believe on Coast to Coast, I think Linda Moulton Howe was introducing you and your segment. It's like, this guy is just ringing true. So I told Scott, don't worry. I think that, well, we'll see. We don't know how people are going to react. And it was received a lot better than we thought it would be. Let me just put it that way.
It generated a lot of emails for me.
Yeah, and I want to hear about that, because what I would say is we got a lot of emails too, but the quotient of the sort of the negative ones that you get and the troll type stuff was very, very low. We got more of that from other much more benign stories. So people were really on board, I think, again, with your sincerity. So yeah, what was it like for you after you came on the show, and what happened in terms of feedback that you got?
Every time I'm on a show, and I've been on lots of shows, but in some regard, it's like telling it for the very first time. I'm reliving it, I'm going through it in my head, and I hope that it comes across as genuine and with sincerity, because it certainly was intended to. I think I had 1,400 emails from people when I wrote this book. When I first wrote Incident at Devil's Den, I thought, I might get 100, 150 emails from people, and I'm now knocking on the door of 1,800.
Wow.
And so many people email me and say, this about your book or what you said really resonates with me. So I appreciate that. Something about my book resonates with people. And I think there's a thread of commonality between what I experienced and what a lot of other people experience.
So, Terry, now that you're back on the show, and we are going to point folks to your prior appearance on the show, of course, where they can hear your story in depth. But for folks that haven't heard that, maybe you could talk a little bit about I know it wasn't the first incident, but the one that you've documented the most in your life and the one that seems to have had the biggest impact for you.
Yeah, that would have been the June 1977 event when I was active duty in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base, which is east of Kansas City. And in June, well, actually about April of 1977, my coworker, we were both EMTs, medics, we drove an ambulance, and we worked the night shift from 11 o'clock p.m. to 8 o'clock in the following morning. My friend came up to me and said, hey, man, I got an idea. Let's go camping. So I, what? What do you want to do? You want to do what? You want to go camping? Well, we just, sleep in your garage and eat bugs and save the gas, He's like, no. And he made a pretty good argument. And I was an amateur photographer. I had a little dark room. I wanted to take some pictures of wildlife. He was an amateur astronomer. He wanted to be somewhere where there was zero light pollution. And he ran into a guy who gave him a map of the park and told him that there was supposedly this high ground, like a plateau. As a matter of fact, thanks to you guys, it was actually located. I had never gone back and looked for it.
Yeah, I had some fun looking for that on Google Earth. I was glad to hear that you felt like it coincided with where this happened.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't bother to look because I thought it'd be covered with 45-year-old mature trees by now. And that's not the case.
Right.
So my friend and I ended up planning this trip. And we made the trip to Devil's Den State Park, which is just on the other side of the Missouri-Arkansas border in northwest Arkansas. And we didn't know it at the time, but the park actually has kind of a long, dark history of disappearances and things. And David Paulides' Missing 411 book series, if anyone's ever heard of them, if you haven't, it's an excellent series of books. His fourth volume is called Missing 411, The Devil is in the Details. And Devil's Den is in the book. We were both city kids. We'd never been camping before. I'd never been camping. Toby had never been camping. But, it's not rocket science. We bought a cheap tent, air mattresses, put a cooler together with some food, and we went down and 6.5-hour drive south, 2-lane blacktop back in the day, found the park, and went in, and we intentionally dodged the kiosk. We weren't going to get a camping permit. I thought we were going to stay in a campground. And Toby's like, no, man, let's be real outdoors, but let's go somewhere where there's no light pollution. if you stay in a campground, you're going to have people to the right of you, people to the left of you. We don't want that. And, I kind of agreed with him. We took off on a road that went to the northwest, I believe, and we ran across a chain across the road with a pretty sternly worded, keep out, do not enter, no hunting, no camping, no fishing. And we thought it was some kind of nature preserve. But we come to find out that it's not actually even part of Devil's Den State Park. It's federal land owned by the Bureau of Land Management and leased to some individual. So we were able to get around the chain, and we drove in, and through good luck or happenstance, we stumbled upon this plateau. It was just beautiful. It was just perfect. And we drove up steep. It wasn't paved. It wasn't gravel. It was just made out of dirt road that went pretty high grade straight up. We went up, crested the top of the hill, and this beautiful meadow opened up in front of us. And we were like, this is a place. This is great. It was gorgeous. It was elevated to the point where we were walking on this meadow. We were level with the tops of the trees, and it was just gorgeous. And we did all the fun stuff you do when you were camping, and of course it was all new to us, so we had a pretty nice time. There were some missteps that I have trouble reconciling, and that was we forgot some things, and that was just out of character for us. I mean, the things we forgot were just not that inept. I don't get it, but that's what we did. We set up our camp. We're on our first night there. My friend sees to his left, he sees 3 little stars on the horizon and a tight triangle. And he asked me, "Hey Terry, were those trees there? Or pardon me, were those lights there before?" About 3 or 4 minutes before he sees the lights on the horizon, I noticed that we were having trouble conversing. We were laying back on our air mattresses. We were having trouble conversing across the campfire because the crickets, the tree frogs, all the stuff that makes noise in the night in the forest was loud. And that abruptly stopped. And I noticed that silence, and I asked my friend, is that normal? And he blew it off. He's like, yeah, look, we've been laughing and cutting up. We made a lot of noise. We just quieted them. They'll be back. But that unnerved me. And a couple minutes later, he saw these 3 lights on the horizon. He asked me, were they there before? And I said, I don't think so. You're the guy that knows about the night sky. Do they belong there? And he said, no, I don't think they do. While we watched, they moved. The first thing they did was they rotated like they were on an axis and turned and aligned themselves where the base of the triangle was parallel with the horizon. And as soon as it did that, it started to move up. And as it started to move up, I felt this wave of almost sedation. I would call it sedation wash over me. I wouldn't say quite apathy, but our emotions were muted. It was almost disinterest. It was a strange place to be, but our emotions were not appropriate to what we were witnessing. I'm sure my friend was in the same frame of mind because we didn't have any conversation. And while we watched, this thing climbed up into the sky. It was pretty obvious that it was one solid object, not 3 objects moving in unison. And it reached a height. I don't know how high it was, but it reached a height, a ceiling. And then it changed orientation from where we were seeing 3 lights, 3 points of light. It turned like this. So it was kind of parallel with the Earth. And then it started like a glide descent. And as it descended, it did 2 somersaults, where the apex of the triangle, which was pointed toward us, dipped down and then came all the way back around. And it did that twice. I had the feeling that it was done intentionally, that it was done to show that this thing is moving with purpose. It's not out of control. Its intent is to do that. It stopped at about 3,000 feet over our campground, or over the meadow. We'd set up camp kind of offset, kind of near the tree line, thankfully, so this thing wasn't hanging right over our heads. But like I say, it was 3,000 feet over our heads. That feeling of calm sedation that we had changed, and it changed from sedation to sleepy. All I wanted to do was pick up my air mattress, walk to the tent, throw it in, and go to sleep. And that's what we did. I woke up some hours later to flashing lights that were orange, some greenish, yellow, and white, and they weren't on a steady or regular pattern. They were just at odd intervals flashing real bright through the canvas of our tent. And I woke up and I didn't have my wits about me. I'm thinking, where am I? Oh yeah, we're camping. And I looked down and my boots had been unlaced. And that annoyed me because I knew I didn't go to bed like that. So I pulled them off and my socks were on sideways. It was a few days later before it occurred to me that we had been dressed and redressed is the reason for that. So I put them on properly. And I noticed my friend is on his knees peeking out through a flap on his side of the tent. And in one of these flashes of white light, I could see tracks of tears down the right side of his face. Because the saline in the tears, I guess, fluoresced. That put my fear level at about a 3 because I couldn't imagine what would make this man cry. In my mind's eye, I'm thinking, these lights are overhead flashing lights of a park ranger's truck or something. And I asked him, I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? What's out there? Is it park rangers? And he didn't give me a coherent answer. And I got to my knees and I looked out the flap of my tent and I saw that this thing that was 3,000 feet over the meadow when we went to bed had descended sometime over the night while we were asleep and is now just 30 feet over the floor of the meadow. And that's why we were able to see the side of it. For before, when it was 3,000 feet up in the air, all we could see was the underside. As I said, we were offset from it. And it was immense. It was a city block on each leg of the triangle. And I also saw what I took to be a dozen, maybe 15 children, what I took to be children, walking around in this meadow underneath this thing. And I asked my friend, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. And he said this, he said, don't you remember they took us and they hurt us? And the second he said that, I had flashes of memory in my mind of being aboard this thing. We both suffered some burns. I had like the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life. I never blistered, I never peeled. We both had what the doctors called flash burns to our eyes, which is what an arc welder would get if they didn't wear the hood. It's very painful. We were very photophobic. Sunlight is painful. When two people go through some kind of experience like this, human nature is you want to talk about it, you want to debrief, you want to validate each other's story. And there was none of that. The only thing we really discussed was we agreed that under no circumstances would we admit to seeing a UFO. Because we were both terrified that that would lead to a psychological evaluation and possibly discharge from the Air Force, maybe lose our education benefits, which was the object of this exercise. So we agreed that we didn't want to lie. We would just tell them we went to bed feeling funny, woke up, felt terrible, came home. Had the sunburn and burns to our eyes. And that was our story we stuck with. And of course, there's a lot more that followed. I don't have time to go into, but then I'll give you a capsule version of what happened to us in June of 1977. One more thing I should mention is that it changed the nature of our relationship. And that was that this guy, I'd worked with him for 3 years. We were both recently married. His wife and my wife were best of friends. I was age 22 at the time. He was 23. And for some reason, on the way back, I didn't want anything to do with this guy. And I really had trouble reconciling that emotion then. I have trouble with it today. I don't know where that comes from. But that seems to be a common thing among people that experience this stuff. They don't want to talk about it. Or a group of friends who witness something, and I call it the band breaks up. I had literally dozens of people write to me and tell me they experienced that. And there's an excellent book by Ray Fowler called The Allagash Four about a thing that happened on the lake up in Maine. And that happened in August of 1976. I think it happened about a year before our experience. But lots of similarities. Missing time, yeah. I should give a couple updates too about the incident at Devil's Den. I promised the readers that, because I gave the story of Rodney Letterman, 32-year-old man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, who was walking the Butterfield Trail with a friend. He left his inhaler in the truck. He had asthma, and he had an asthma attack. And he asked his friend, hey, would you run back to the truck and grab my inhaler? Friend says, sure, no sweat. So friend runs back to the truck, grabs the inhaler, runs back, and there's no Rodney Letterman. All there is a cell phone on the ground. And I was able to speak with someone from the Russellville Police Department who told me that they brought in dogs who got a scent from the phone, but then just sat down. And I said, well, what does that mean? I don't know anything about dogs. And he says, that means that the scent ends there. And I said, well, how can that be? He says, I don't know. He either went up or he went down, but he wasn't there. So what followed was a 7-day intensive search with lots of volunteers and lots of people, helicopters with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, looking for a heat signature from the guy at night. Nothing. They find nothing. The official search ended at the 7th day and then transitioned to, from a rescue to a recovery. And the family paid some private trackers to try to find the guy. And that went on through October. And they never found, from August 17th, they never found anything of the guy. And I told the readers, I'll give you an update if I get one. March of 2019, I got an update. A young couple was walking down the Butterfield Trail, and there's a log that runs parallel to the trail. He told me that this young couple, the young lady says to her friend, is that an albino turtle? And the friend's like, what? What are you talking about? And there is a roughly triangular shaped white thing. And what's curious is it's sitting directly in the center of this log. The log's kind of a decorative piece that kind of lines the trail. And I thought back to my days as a prosecutor, and it's kind of like a staged crime scene. The Rangers were sure it wasn't there the day before because it was so conspicuous. They said, we would have saw it. And they retrieved it with a proper forensic protocol, sent it to the medical examiner in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, who verified that it was the very top of Rodney Letterman's skull. And that is all they ever found of Rodney Letterman. Not a scrap of clothing or other bones or anything, just that.
We sure got a lot of emails about our Exorcist series, and a lot of them were from listeners who deal with mental illness. They approve of how we talked about it as it related to the story behind The Exorcist.
Yeah, we're so grateful to hear that because we've always taken mental health seriously, and the messages we got from you folks show not only how common it is, but how much more prevalent a part of the global conversation it's become, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, you don't have to be in the running for an exorcism to experience anxiety and stress. We all experience it daily, and that's why we're happy to tell you about Noom Mood. Noom Mood is here to help guide you to mental wellness.
Yeah, just the idea of tackling stress can be stressful in itself.
But it doesn't have to be. Noom Mood helps you take the journey one step at a time with guides who teach you the power of shifting your mindset in just a few minutes a day. I took an off-roading class once on what to do if your vehicle rolls over on a trail, and I remember the instructor saying, the first thing you do is sit down and have some tea. He was British, of course, but he said, take your time, figure out the safest and best way to proceed. And that's the same kind of advice you get about dealing with stress and anxiety from Noom Mood.
Yeah, that's their answer for everything. But listen, Noom Mood teaches you to assess the situation, and it gives you the tools to conquer it so you can plan on how to deal with it. This approach is backed by science.
Yeah, well, that's because it works. You get a variety of tools and techniques to try out, and it holds your hand along the way with a daily curriculum and coaches to advise and encourage you, all in just 10 minutes a day.
Look, folks, you're in the driver's seat here, so don't let stress or anxiety control you. You take the steps to take charge of it and find the road to happiness.
You've already heard us talk about Noom's weight loss program, which has worked wonders for both of us. Noom Mood is a logical next step for personal wellness. And frankly, it's empowering.
Everyone has 10 minutes a day for something this important, including us. So worry less and feel happier. Sign up for your trial at noom.com/legends. That's NOOM.com/legends.
Sign up now for your trial at noom.com/legends. That's NOOM.com/legends. We've had no shortage of strange tech issues since we started covering the paranormal. We had a laptop experience a kernel panic during the Theories episode of our Oak Island series, for example, and it actually bit the dust.
Really? Well, yes, I think we panicked a little too. Look, I have had gear go down on paranormal investigations. It worked fine before I got to the place and then immediately after.
Yeah, and then our Halloween episode, part 2 of The Exorcist, with arguably the scariest stuff in it from that series, and our biggest show of the year for listens, spontaneously did not appear on Apple Podcasts, and that took 3 days to fix.
Well, I guess that's just the price of doing paranormal business.
I guess it is. But you know what we've never had a ghost in the machine with? Squarespace.
Well, that's a great point, man. Well, look, we've been with them for like 4 years now, right? It's never gone down or given us any kind of significant problem.
No, it's amazing, really. I think it's one of the most reliable bits of software we use.
Well, it is right up there. I mean, I'm the one who has to use it the most because I build the web pages for each episode, but it's a really powerful tool that's not only reliable, like we said, but it's actually pretty easy to use. It's literally an all-in-one platform. And it's not just about a website. You can use it for your online store to sell products, both virtual and real, including subscription products. And it has built-in analytics and marketing tools, including email marketing, SEO tools, social media integration, and so much more.
Yeah, and I guess social selling is right around the corner, too. By the way, folks, if you're a true Astonishing Legends fan and you're not visiting the episode web pages, you're missing out on a ton of stuff that Forrest is putting up there, including most of our references, photos, links to videos, and more, because Squarespace makes that easy to do. It's a great place to go much further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and even put in Dave Glover's video on there, plus his audio clips. And that was easy. Look, folks, if you've got a great idea and you've been waiting to get online with it, there's no better time than now, and no better platform than Squarespace.
And maybe you already have a website, but it's outdated and clunky, and you need to up your game. Again, Squarespace is the solution. Check out squarespace.com/legends for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LEGENDS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
That's right. Head on over to squarespace.com/legends for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LEGENDS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Hey, this is Chris Jericho, AEW champion and lead singer of Fozzy, and the host of Talk is Jericho. When I'm on the road, which is all the time, and have some downtime, which is also all the time, I listen to Astonishing Legends. You should as well, because there ain't nothing more legendary than the Dream Team of Philbrook and Burgess. Right up there with Martin and Lewis, Batman and Robin, and the Sasquatch and the Loch Ness Monster, Daddy.
That also reminded me of another case from the Missing 411 in one of their documentaries. And in that case, I don't think it's the same one. It's a documentary I saw last year, produced by David Politis, where it also documents the only thing being found from somebody who went missing, and I think maybe this was a year or two later, was a large piece of skull fragment of this man's poor son. And that was the only thing found. They were able to track it to his son, but that was striking to me, and that people who saw it was, as you called it, the crown of the skull, and not a perfect cut around the top, but the dome part of it, right?
Yes. Yeah, I was told by someone from a police department that this was jagged on the edges, like it had been broken, roughly football shaped.
Right. I believe what they found of this man's son's skull fragment was a pretty large piece, and I don't think anything else was found. There might have been some clothing. That's another typical thing of the that's odd about the Missing 411 is they might find clothing, and of course, if you think it's a wild animal attack, which of course that's the most logical thing that people gravitate to and want to settle on, the clothes don't look as aged as they should be for being out in the weather for 2 years. Sometimes I believe there's cases where the clothing is folded, like you say, a staged crime scene.
There are. I've read the entire series. There are cases where the clothing is folded. There are cases that this intrigues me. Like a pair of pants is left on the ground, and it looked like someone just stepped out of them. So it's just collapsed. And sometimes on top of shoes. And lots of times, majority of the times when people are found, they're found barefoot.
Right. We're not going to talk about this in detail right now, but I wanted to tease this little element because it's a long arc, connect the dots for me in that, do you believe that this case that you just described with Rodney Letterman has anything to do with what Sue, or Betty, as we'll get to introduce her later on, had to tell you about what some ETs might be up to, which may involve abduction and murder? Do you think that there's a connection there?
I think so. This is just conjecture. I try to stay away from conjecture,
Right.
but as long as it's invited, I'll give it.
Well, of course, but as like yourself, as you say in the book, we learn more about this by seeing similarities and connecting dots and finding commonalities between cases. And it just occurred to me as we had on Jeremy Corbell a couple of episodes ago, and part of the discussion turned to kind of the reason that he got in touch with us through a friend and listener now was a cattle mutilation site, and it's somewhere in northern Texas. And when you hear about it, and then you wonder, why is this going on? Is it just scientific sampling from some powerful organization? Or is it something that fits that, but also in a more rudimentary way, just for the meat? And you do wonder about that. And after reading your book, it does make me wonder if there are more motivations, let's say. But we can talk about that when we start to go to the most revealing things towards the end of our discussion. But I just want to put that out there so we can circle back on it later.
Yeah, Linda Moulton Howe read my second book and reached out to me with kind of the same question. And I've been on her show a couple of times, and we had a nice long discussion. I won't go into it now, but there is a thread of commonality I didn't even realize that runs through with the cattle mutilations. I had people from the near-death experience community, maybe 7, 8 people, write to me and say, do you see the things in common between near-death experiences and an abduction experience? And I was like, no, I never gave that a thought. And they say that there is.
I was certainly reminded of that when you talked about it in a section of your book about consciousness studies and the personality, the essence of someone's soul and consciousness surviving after bodily death. And that's a running gag and meme on our show, is everything being connected. And it certainly seemed to connect up in that regard with not only the abduction experience, but also the near-death experience and all these strange things that happen to people where you now see commonalities laying over one on top of another in different phenomena.
Yeah, ghosts, Bigfoot, all of it.
Yeah, everything is connected, it seems like. Well, did you have other updates you want to share? Or do you want to talk, because I do want to talk about your cousin, Gerald, and also your friend, Ernie. I think we should touch on that. It's a fascinating component of your new book.
Yeah, let's jump into that. I'll tell you, I wrote both of those chapters for inclusion in Incident at Devil's Den, the first book. And my editor said, look, you've talked enough about your childhood. Nobody wants to hear all about your childhood. You know, this isn't your memoirs. This is a book to disclose what happened. So, yeah, I think it's very important. I had a cousin. His name was Gerald, and he lived in north central Arkansas. And my family came from that part of Arkansas originally. And back in World War II, migrated to St. Louis, Missouri for jobs. We lived a number of hours apart, a good half day's drive. They would come once a year and spend a week, maybe 2 weeks in the summer with us. And then, around Thanksgiving, we'd go down to their house and they would host us for a couple of weeks. Whoever the host was supplied the food and the water and the beverage, playing cards. And I think it was how poor people vacationed back in the day, kind of a weird Airbnb kind of thing. So they came up to see us in 1963. This was just a few months before I saw the saucer in my backyard that I speak about in Incident at Devil's Den. I was having just a hard time with the monkey man thing, with 4 little monkeys that would appear in my room and abduct me. And it was crazy too, because they would ask, won't you come with us, Terry? Come with us. We'll bring you back, put you back in bed in time.
When you talked about them and the first time you were on, and then reading about them again, it is such a frightening idea. And then when you have these other stories, a good component of your new book being things that people have sent into you, where people are experiencing similar interactions, but with different creatures. It's almost like each experience is tailored to the person. One detail, and maybe you had this in your first book, one detail that I missed was when you said it was like they had these masks that were like paper plates with the eyes cut out.
Yeah.
Like that, I was like, ugh, what is happening? And why, I mean, if you know it's a monkey, why is it wearing this mask? It's just so crazy.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that these things have the ability to appear to the child in a way that the child will find most benign.
Right.
Because when I first saw them, I thought they were kind of comical. My poor cousin Gerald, he wasn't in a room by himself. He was in a room with twin brothers that were younger than him in bunk beds in the same room. and these four little clowns. My wife likes to say, the circus theme fits the Lovelace family,
Yeah.
But yeah, he saw clowns.
Yeah, because so he was seeing clowns, like small clowns.
Yeah. And people emailed me, they saw raccoons, they saw orbs of light. One woman saw Disney characters.
Owls.
Deer, owls, lots of owls.
Yeah. The most comical thing, but also frightening, if you think about it, it turns that way, is somebody seeing what looked like small Elmo creatures from the Muppets, the small red furry creatures popping up in the field, and then more and more, and then starting to come towards them. And it wasn't so comical anymore. Even their appearance is funny. And to a kid, of course, it's a very welcome sight. But after a while, when you see more and more of them, and then you get the sense that they're not here to be friendly, and it's probably time to go before more show up and you find out what they're really after. We've heard that from the book. But the other thing was the mechanics of, as you described it, the paper mask. And that when I read that passage, I was wondering, you described their facial expressions, them speaking to you but not moving their lips, but you have a pie plate type paper mask that they're all wearing with eye holes cut out so you could see these blazing yellow eyes underneath. But was the rest of the face painted on the paper of sorts, or was it animated on the paper?
I remember it as being a painted on, like with a magic marker, smile. But when I would say, no, it's not right, I don't want to go, that would morph into a grimace. So yeah, I think that somehow it was changing.
Right. That's the impression that I got, was that it was not natural. It wasn't a picture on the paper or glued onto the paper somehow. It wasn't a picture of a monkey's face, but it was drawn or illustrated, but also it animated itself, like to change expression.
It did.
Okay, that seemed like the case to me. And the same thing with the clowns. You still had the bright yellow eyes underneath that Gerald described, but a clown's face, as you said, with a red nose painted on, but it was also animated.
Yeah, it was animated in that we both agreed that the smile could turn to a grimace. I don't remember the word you used. It wasn't frowned, but it turned into something more frightening.
Right. And in regards to that, bringing it back to David Weatherly's book, that's something I noticed as well when you said, you finally had enough and you yelled out, "This isn't right. I don't want to go with you." That's not what they wanted to hear. The four monkeys that entered your bedroom numerous times, they suddenly were very displeased. And I think you described the eyes turning black.
I don't remember that so much.
Okay.
I do remember the eyes and the grin and all turning threatening, but
right.
They have the ability to control my perception. So
right. It was just another tie-in, though, with what in David's book accounts from people.
You're absolutely right. Not turning black, but as in pupils dilating.
Ah.
Because I made the comparison to my cat's eyes, how her eyes would dilate. So yeah, there was less of the yellow iris around the pupil because the black part of the eye would dilate. So that is true.
Wow, that is interesting because people have sworn that they've seen or met black-eyed children and black-eyed adults. And when they get angry or you upset them, the eyes, the full sclera turning completely black, and that freaking people out. But it's like, I guess the comparison is that that's one aspect that whatever these things are, black-eyed adults and children, or minion aliens that are the grays or whatever they're disguised at, can't control. For some reason, maybe it's spiritual, I don't know, but they can't hide the eyes. There's always something that is not completely 100% spot on. And that's what gives them away. And it's usually when they can't control their emotions. You talk about in your book so much about they're masters of thought. If they're able to communicate telepathically, you don't need language. And they have that under control, except when they get very emotional, if they have emotions at all. But they do seem to be displeased when things aren't going their way.
I had a couple of people write to me and say, these things don't have emotions at all. And I emailed them back and said, well, the ones I did, I thought experienced emotion. Can you tell me how you came to that conclusion? And they couldn't.
This is more towards the end of the book. I don't remember reading it in Incident at Devil's Den, but I found it chilling, and you described it yourself as one of the most chilling aspects, is that when you were taken aboard the ship, and you were immobile, unable to move except for your eyes, you and Toby. And I don't want to bring this back to finding out what happened to Toby, which we can talk about after this, but you looked over at him with just your eyes, and at that moment, coincidentally, he had looked at you, and you both locked eyes, and you said in that moment, he knew all your thoughts, your history, your deepest, darkest secrets. But the way you described it was chilling in that he instantly knew all this about you, like your Akashic record, you could say, everything that was stored information about you, but there was zero emotion, zero empathy. It was strictly pure intellect.
The guy was in my head, and it was pure intellect. And I came away from that feeling so inadequate emotionally, intellectually, on all levels.
Wait, you're talking about the bug, right? Not Toby.
No, I'm talking about when we were both frozen, standing side by side. There was about a 6-foot-tall alien. He was taller than the Greys. The Greys were running around.
That's the guy that was in your head.
That's the guy that he's as far to my left as I could be and keep him in my field of vision. And I'm straining my eyes to the left. He turned his head, and we locked eyes for a millisecond, and that was the most frightening thing that happened to me.
Yeah.
That was more frightening than the insectoid things that had a medical vibe to them.
Did you get anything back as far as what he got from you? Any impressions, thoughts? Of course, there's the interesting scene in the movie Independence Day when the president gets a mind meld with the alien, and he says, "I could see everything they wanted to do. They're locusts. They're going to use all our resources. They want us gone." Not only was the alien able to telepathically communicate with him or through Brett Spiner, but there was an exchange of information, and that once you open that pathway, he got something back. But in your case, you got nothing from them.
No, nothing with that entity, nothing whatsoever.
In The Reckoning, I thought it was very poignant when you described the relationship was similar to like how you feel as a human, how you feel about your dog. In terms of intellect, and that you are felt as intellectually insignificant to this being as a dog would feel to a person.
That's the best analogy I can think of. It really is.
Well, yeah, you made that one. I mean, I thought that was really compelling, just in terms of you're not going to be able to have a conversation or say, what are your motivations or anything like that any more than my dog is going to be able to ask me where I'm going when I go to get in the car.
That's frightening to me.
Yeah.
I guess it was equally, of course, frightening to Toby. And we received a handful of emails after your interview the first time with people asking us what happened to Toby. And you didn't go into too much detail, I think, out of respect for the family and his ex-wife. But you also received a lot of questions. In fact, that might be the biggest question or the most often asked question to you is what happened to your best friend, Toby?
Yeah. And before I go into Toby and his, because he had a sad decline, I do think it's fair to mention that I had my own struggles. I came away from this scarred. One of the things that we shared, and that a lot of people that have been through this share, is fear of the night and fear of the darkness. I still sleep with a light on. I sleep with the door open. The drapes have to be drawn tightly closed. I really have a tough time sleeping in a hotel room. In the beginning, I would have a glass of wine before I went to bed. And, then that became 2, and then that became 3. And luckily, I recognized that as a slippery slope and gave that up. And of course, in the 90s and 80s, really, there was proliferation of benzodiazepines. And, you want some Valium to help you sleep, here you go. But then again, that's a slippery slope of its own. So I learned to live on 2 hours sleep, or I'll take a 25 milligram Benadryl before I go to bed. That seems to be all I need. Most nights I can get to sleep. But Toby and his wife separated shortly after they went to Japan. And Toby's wife, Tammy, left him and took their 2 children back to the States. And she was somewhere in a little town, municipality around LA. I don't remember which one it was. And she called my wife, this was in the 80s, and said the guy she had remarried, and I think her children were adopted by him. And he was a long haul trucker. He was driving across country, and she was going to go on a trip with him. and the kids stayed with their grandparents, and she was going to go. She'd never been on a cross-country trip before, and they were going to go to Detroit. And I was in Lansing, so we were right on the way. And she asked my wife, would you guys like some company? And we were like, sure, absolutely, stop by, you know. So they did. And I got to ask her what happened to Toby. And it was a bit awkward in that here she is with her new man, and I'm wanting to quiz her about her ex. So I didn't get to go into the depth that I really wanted to. But the short story was that Toby had pretty much the same problems I had, in that he was afraid to go to sleep at night. And she said that Toby turned into a drinker, and he was not a drinker before this happened at all. And the last time I saw him, I smelled liquor on his breath, and that was out of character for him. But she said that he would not drink during the day, he didn't frequent bars, but as the sun started to go down, he would start pounding vodka. He had to do that to sleep. We all know what happens when you go down that path. I mean, it robs you of REM sleep. It's unhealthy on so many levels. He ended up not being able to go to University of Michigan and study physics, had a string of failed careers, and never remarried. The other story I tell in the book is about the FBI agent, and I drew a lot of fire from this, from people in law enforcement. And I want to be clear, I try to be clear in the book, and that is that, you know, when I was a prosecutor, I worked with law enforcement. Felt like I was on the team, and I had nothing but the greatest respect for people in law enforcement. I think they do a very tough job. And the federal agents that I've met in the course of my career have all been stand-up people. I mean, just to cut above. And I met a FBI agent in the 80s. We became friends. We were both working at the same law firm on a case, doing different things I won't go into, but sometimes we'd meet at the bar on a Friday night and have a cocktail and some bar snacks and kind of decompress from the week. So I decided I'm going to ask this guy, hey, can you find Toby for me? So you got to understand FBI humor, I guess. Because I asked him, I said, hey, can you help me find a buddy I was in the Air Force with? And he's like, sure, I can find anybody as long as they're not a fugitive. And I feigned a laugh, because that's, of course, what they do. He said, sure. He says, you know, I can't open an investigation, obviously, but he says, as a favor to a friend, let me see what I can do for you. He says, give me everything you got on the guy. Write down every single detail you can think of. Give me photographs, habits, relatives you know of, where he went to school, what he did, what he liked, what he didn't like. Give me everything.
I want to quickly interject here for our listeners, just to refresh so everyone knows who we're talking about. This is Terry's friend that was with him for the incident in 1977 that we're talking about here. So,
yeah, thank you. That needs to be clarified. This is my friend Toby. That was with me on the camping trip.
Yeah.
I refer to him in the book as Frank, the FBI agent. I dropped off the paperwork for him, which I ended up, you'd be amazed if you work 3 years at a night shift with someone, how much you can learn about them. And I had 3 type pages full of stuff and a couple of photographs that I wish I'd kept and I didn't get back. But, you know, it is what it is. He acknowledged receipt of them, put them in a sealed envelope, dropped them off at his office. He said, I'll get back to you, give me 2 weeks. And 2 weeks to the day, I got a phone call and said, hey, I got some info on your buddy, meet me at the bar. Sure. So for that Friday, we met, and he was late, and that was out of character for him. And when he walked in, he had this hangdog expression that didn't look like it was going to be good news, whatever it was he wanted to tell me. And he sat down and he said, I got bad news for you. Your friend is dead. And I said, he's dead? What do you mean he's dead? He's a young man. How can he be dead? And he had this elaborate story about on Highway 94 out of Flint, there was a crossover accident. This is an interstate highway, and it was a head-on collision. And he was the only fatality, but he didn't make it. And I'm stunned. And he's like, I hate to tell you this, Terry, but you've been around the block once or twice. You know that this happens. This is life. I mean, my suggestion is you process it, move on with your life. And I kicked myself because I could have so easily picked up the phone and called the Michigan State Police and verified that. Could have easily, I even thought about doing it. I thought about getting a copy of the police report, and I didn't for whatever reason. And then in 2017, when I was working on the incident at Devil's Den, I thought, it would be nice to go to Michigan and visit his grave. I'd like to do that. So in the course of running that down, I found that he was alive until September of 2007. So the FBI agent lied to me. I think, again, this is conjecture, but I really believe this. And I've had some other people say that they'd be inclined to agree. Somewhere there's a file for Toby and I on the federal level, and some kind of note that says, hey, these two guys shouldn't get their heads together and come up with a story. Because I think we could present a very credible argument.
Just to revisit, I rember this, but again, to tell our listeners, the base you guys were at, what was the job of that base, Whiteman, at the time?
Whiteman at the time was the Strategic Air Command, or a SAC base. And it had a squadron of B-52s armed with nuclear weapons. And it had a squadron of Minutemen II ICBM missiles spread out all over the countryside. So it was a very high security, very secretive kind of place to work. It's still a nuclear base in that, they pulled the missiles in the 90s. The B-52s are long gone, but it's now home to the B-2 bombers, which have nuclear capabilities. So SAC doesn't even exist anymore.
Right. So that plays into a lot of which you talk about in your prior appearance on our show, a lot of how you were treated afterwards, but also like the ongoing security around this. Well, here's my question for you. When I read about this, I began to wonder if you were a mark, if he had picked you out to make a friendship with you so that they could keep tabs on you and eventually, once you asked that question, deliver this information to you. Has that ever crossed your mind? Or do you think more, no, it was a legitimate, authentic interpersonal relationship, but when it came time to look for Toby, he was asked to sew it up with you?
I hadn't given that a lot of thought, but
I watch a lot of spy movies. I read a lot of Clancy, a lot of Ludlum.
In our conversations that we had, he was very interested in what I did in the Air Force.
Right.
So he did 2 years in the Army, but didn't tell me what he did, but he wanted to hear all about what I did.
It makes you wonder if he's feigning interest to endear himself to you and get an interpersonal relationship going. And what I know about this, again, I read a bunch of spy books and I watched the movie Spy Game, and I watched them train people into thinking that they're instigating the relationship when in fact it's the other way around, and it's to obtain intelligence or keep tabs on somebody.
Yeah, that's a good point. And because the recurring theme throughout your story, especially with Incident at Devil's Den, is that there is influence being peddled and manipulated. And whether it's U.S. government, human, or extraterrestrial influence, everybody's being influenced. The other theme that comes up consistently is a matter of trust, that nobody can trust any other person or being or entity or agency. That leads me to an earlier question I had. Do you think that the guy that was friends with Toby, was he somehow influenced either by governmental forces, human forces, or by extraterrestrial influence to suggest that camping spot to Toby?
That has been asked by a lot of people. Someone from To the Stars Academy that I had a friendship with for a while, that he really drilled down on that point, and that was, how do you think your buddy came up with this place? And I said, well, he met some guy who gave him a brochure, like from the kiosk. And he said, well, why would he pick this place 6.5 hours away when Knob Noster State Park is directly across the street from the main gate of the base that you're stationed at? And I said, yeah, I know. And I asked my friend that, and my friend said, well, yeah, sometimes isn't the trip as much a part of the adventure as being there? And then he kind of caught me off guard and said, do you think he set you up? And I said, I don't think so. And I guess the true answer is, I don't know. And I think about ET working in concert with the United States government. I think of that as an option, too.
Right. And leading to the next question is, do you think this plateau, which is technically just outside of the park, I believe, still on federal land, but as you said, perhaps privately leased, do you think that plateau is some kind of agreed upon rendezvous place between our government and ET?
I absolutely do. And that's not quite all conjecture, in that I do have one personal experience to base that opinion on.
Right.
I believe so, yeah. When you guys found that and found the aerial photograph of it, I was stunned. I was really genuinely stunned. And I put it on my Facebook page, and a friend of mine who's a landscaper down in Alabama, blew it up and said he could see the tractor marks. He said someone goes up there with a tractor and a brush hog and keeps that clear cut. And my question is, why would the federal government spend the time to pay a man or woman to climb onto a tractor to go up an unpaved dirt road, pulling what's called a brush hog? That's what he said they used, like a big lawnmower deck they pull behind a tractor. It's a lot of gas to burn over 50 years.
Yeah, it's every couple of weeks you're going to have to be up there doing that for that field, which is it's pretty big. Wow, it's interesting. But the other component of this, which people that hadn't heard you on the show before, is that there was almost a close encounters component to you guys, you and Toby going there. You guys felt compelled to take this trip, compelled to go to this place, like you were drawn to it, which that's another really fascinating part of it, I think. And it's like you talked about the details of forgetting things that were basic to both of the things that you were most interested in, right? The photography gear, some other things like that, right? That you left behind.
Oh, photography was the whole purpose of me going. I bought some new filters. I bought some fresh film. I had it all packed in my camera bag. I left it on my kitchen table. And I'm just not this inept. A neighbor lent me a nice camp lantern, a gallon of camp fuel, fuel for the lantern, and a nice hand axe. Left all that stuff at home. Toby forgot half the stuff, but we had enough to get us through one night.
Right.
We took just enough.
And no pictures were taken with Toby's Kodak Instamatic 126 camera?
Never crossed our minds. Never crossed our... we're sitting there on these air mattresses. Toby's got his backpack within reach, and his camera's right there. And neither one of us thought to take a photograph. And I had people write to me and say, my wife and I saw this giant UFO, and I never thought to take my phone out and take a picture.
Yeah, there's a couple of incidents in the Reckoning book where you say that people don't think to do it. And it's like you said, I know earlier you said it's not necessarily with regard to Devil's Den, it's not necessarily apathy, but there's a resignation that happens. Because we talk about on our show what we call paranormal apathy, which encompasses all kinds of cases. People wake up in the middle of the night, they see something crazy, a ghost or whatever, and invariably they go back to bed. Nobody instigates an investigation or tries to get gear or get proof. It's almost like there's some sort of overarching control that is saying, these aren't the droids you're looking for. Just just go back to bed or whatever.
No, and it happened in a very mundane, lackadaisical way to a very good friend of ours, Rob Christopherson from Our Strange Skies podcast. And I love the story because, he's vast knowledge of UFOs and cases like this. And he was at work, I believe, as the story goes, talking about UFOs to a friend, just casually for fun with a coworker. They step outside for a break. I think the coworker may have stepped outside for a smoke. Rob goes to join him. Rob doesn't smoke, but he was. They were just walking outside, and then
hanging out. Yeah,
yeah, they're hanging out. But they see this large, hovering, floating egg in the sky, as he described it, something egg-shaped, white, just on the sky, and they're like, "Hey, look at that! That's kind of weird." Yeah. Well, all right, let's go back. And I believe they had cell phones on them, and you just don't think to take a photo, even when you were just talking about seeing UFOs. And then you see one.
I don't even think I put this in the Reckoning, but, I had my wife, we were at the optometrist in 2015, and we came out of the optometrist office. Her eyes hadn't been dilated, nothing wrong with her vision, just wearing her glasses. And we walked to the parking lot, and here's this woman like this, looking up in the sky. Well, I look up, and here's this saucer. Plain as day, silver metallic saucer. And I'm like, Sheila, look at that. And I point to my wife. And she's like, what? I'm like, you don't see that? She's like, I don't see anything. And I asked this woman, this stranger, I said, madam, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And she just looked at me and went, so she saw it, I saw it, my wife couldn't see it.
Right. So that's something that comes up frequently on our show too. And that comes up, and that's where we get back to the everything is connected thing, because that is consistent with paranormal experiences, not just UFO experiences, but all kinds of experiences where different people in the same group are seeing something different. We just had a story a few episodes ago. It's been a couple months now, and it's a local story to where I live now in Greensboro, North Carolina, where 4 people saw this thing that at first they thought was a horse in a field, and it turned into a whole paranormal interaction. Sorry, I didn't phrase that rightly. 3 of them saw it, and the other one didn't. And 2 of the 3 who saw it heard thundering hooves, but the one of those 3 didn't hear the hooves. it's Rashomon, everyone's getting a different takeaway. It begs the question, are these experiences within or without? How is that controlled? I can't quite figure out the thing that I've been puzzling over lately, especially with our last several shows. We just did one on a book called The Vertical Plane that is a mind-boggling time communication thing. I can't figure out if these different perceptions that people are having are related to our sense of reality, or that our reality is so different from what we think it is that it's actually not that unusual that some people are seeing it and some aren't. It's just unusual to us because of how we see this construct. I'm not explaining it very well, but
No, you are. I think you're explaining it very well. And I agree with that. I don't think the human beings are ever capable of having a truly objective experience.
yeah, that's a better
I
way
mean,
of putting
I'm
it.
looking at you on the screen and I'm seeing you the way you were a thousandth of a second ago, because it takes that long for the image to breach my optic nerve and be interpreted. It all goes back to that consciousness thing too, I think.
Well, Forrest, I've been adding a ton of new pictures to the Skylight frames that my family has.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, well, I've got some elderly folks, as you know, dealing with memory issues, and it's been an amazing way to help keep their minds stimulated and remind them, and me as well when I upload them, of great memories from the past.
Yeah, that really is super important, my man. And not just for your relatives, but you too, especially around the holidays. I mean, Thanksgiving has already come and gone now, and we're hurtling towards Christmas and Hanukkah and all the other year-end traditions that can be a sad time for folks that are spread out geographically.
Yeah, and I already have 3 or 4 Skylight frames that I've given out. But folks, if you're looking for a perfect gift for the family you have that you might not see this year, or even if you do see them, they live far enough away that it's infrequent, then a Skylight frame is right on the money. It'll make them feel like you're right there with them during the holidays and year round, honestly.
Yeah, when you leave the nest, sometimes you wind up a lot further away from the ones you love than you'd like to be. But the Skylight frame can close that gap. It's a photo frame that you can update instantly by email from anywhere. It sets up in less than a minute. You just plug it in, and then you use the touchscreen to connect to a wireless network, and then you enjoy it.
Everyone in your family can effortlessly email pictures to the personal Skylight email address, and they pop up in seconds. If you have a large family or a group of people, it's a great way to keep in touch.
Yep, and it has a black frame with a white mat, so it looks like a real stylish photo frame that matches any decor and adds a beautiful touch to any home. And with the 10-inch touchscreen, you can just swipe through the photos with your finger, and then you can even tap to send a thank you to the person that sent it to you.
Skylight is 100% satisfaction guaranteed. If you don't love it, you'll get a full refund. On top of that, you can preload it with your favorite photos to personalize your gift.
Now, as a special offer, you can get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight frame when you go to skylightframe.com and then you enter code LEGENDS.
That's right. To get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight frame, just go to skylightframe.com and enter code LEGENDS. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com. Promo code LEGENDS. You know how sometimes you sit around looking at your streaming options, previewing like a million titles, and nothing seems to compel you to press play?
Oh, yes. Sometimes I'll spend 15 minutes or more trying to pick something out, and then I just give up.
Exactly. And you know what? Whenever that happens to me, I head over to Wondrium.com, and inside of 2 minutes, I'm watching something amazing.
Yeah, they do have great stuff over there. So what's the latest that you've seen that's kind of curious?
Well, you and I are both classic film buffs, which I think everyone knows. And I was kicking around on there the other day, and I found this documentary called Becoming Cary Grant. And I'm a huge Cary Grant fan, both from the obvious North by Northwest, but also Howard Hawks' film Bringing Up Baby with him and Katharine Hepburn. I mean, it's just amazing movies. But Cary himself is so compelling, and this doc is not only enlightening about what he was really like, it's actually a bit spooky, and everyone knows we love spooky.
Really? Spooky?
Well, yeah, I guess it's the way it's directed and edited. I mean, check this out. It's based on his unpublished autobiography, and it's filled with never-before-seen personal footage that he himself shot on film cameras over the years. That, with the way it's narrated and assembled, is both haunting and fascinating.
Oh, yeah. I have heard that he did do a lot of documentation like that. Well, that sounds really cool.
Yeah, there's actually a quote in there about how insecure he is about being the persona that he was. The quote is, "Everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant." So, I guess he had his demons. Apparently, he tried everything from yoga to hypnotism, magnetism, spiritualism.
That's most of the isms we cover on the show.
Yeah, but you know what worked for him? LSD.
I have heard that. Well, he was doing that a long time before it got really popular and fashionable, though, right?
Yeah, apparently so. Anyway, it's a great documentary, and it's just one reason that Wondrium is our favorite streaming service. Their curated library of content makes learning about things a blast. They cover every topic you've ever wondered about.
You came up with that, didn't you?
No.
Line.
That line's actually part of our copy, but honestly, I agree with it, so I sold it.
All right. Well, look, dive into documentaries here like Scott or travel logs and tutorials. There's so much more. Pretty much anything you can imagine.
You too can watch Becoming Cary Grant and thousands of other videos Wondrium has. And now we have an amazing offer to get you started. A free trial of unlimited access.
But to get this offer, you have to sign up now through our special URL. Wondrium.com/legends. That's WONDRIUM.com/legends.
Wondrium is our favorite streaming service. We get to learn about whatever we want, whenever we want.
So go to Wondrium.com/legends.
Chester Westerford here. When my cousin Bailey and I aren't running from monsters on our YouTube series, Westerford and Smith, we're probably listening to Astonishing Legends.
Oh no! Hey Chester! Dracula's back!
Oh no, I gotta run. Let's get back to the show.
There's a couple of things I want to ask you. And one, I asked you again the first time you were on the show, and I know that you're totally comfortable being asked this because I asked before about this. Folks that just say, okay, look, all of this, it's a cover-up for sexual abuse or abuse situations. What's happening is they're dissociating. In fact, there was a story of these two girls, which is a really fascinating story that wrote into you, and I do want to talk about that in a minute. But there was an implication from I believe, a psychiatrist or a psychologist that they had had an encounter with each other and that this was all just a cover-up for that. Do you think there are some cases of sexual abuse of children where probably there is a dissociation and that is a thing, but do you think that these kinds of events that we're talking about coexist with that and that that's a separate reality?
I can answer this best by giving you an explanation. I was at the North Texas MUFON in Grapevine in 2018, about 2 months after my book came out, did a presentation for the group there. And one of the attendees walked up to me and shook my hand. Hey, how you doing? I'm fine. Yeah, shared cordialities. He mentioned that he was a practicing psychiatrist from Dallas, board-certified psychiatrist. And since 2018, we've become good friends. We'll hang out, we'll have a cocktail together if COVID will allow, and, just become friends because he's got fascinating things to say. And my first question was, what's a board-certified psychiatrist doing at a MUFON meeting? He's about my age, but he still runs a full caseload, sees a full load of patients every week. So he's active in his practice. And he says that 15 years ago, he's dealt a lot with genuine sexual abuse of children. He dealt a lot with people that would have stories like mine. And then he would research them and he would actually use hypnosis and other things. And he says, I believe they are absolutely two distinct and separate phenomena. He says sexual abuse is one thing and it manifests differently than alien abduction. And he is a solid believer in alien abduction. For the people that say that, I'd say you're entitled to that opinion. Of course, I respect that. Maybe research the literature a little bit, because there is some new literature coming out about sexual abuse in children. Yeah, he says there are two different phenomena. I believe him.
Okay. This is an interesting point. We deal with this, or we come across this aspect, usually with more supernatural cases and ones that involve, you could say, dark entities or shadow people even, or demonic entities of some kind. It seems to be the case where you hear this so often that there is some arrangement with the person that is interacting with these entities on the other side, and that you give them permission. If you do give them permission, say playing around with a Ouija board where you invite somebody in to communicate with you, but you don't say goodbye or close that channel, or you somehow invite these spirits into your place or even into yourself, that there has to be some tacit agreement that where you are allowing this. And we always call that the rules, and that you do seem to be, in a lot of cases, not every case, there could be vulnerability. And it could be, as we've said before, drug abuse, emotional abuse, some kind of weakness where they're allowed to kind of crack that armor and make their way in. But something that kind of connected with me is when you were talking about the monkey men coming in and when they first appeared, telling you, come and play with us. Your other friends will be there. Won't you come and play with us? That they were asking for permission up to a point. And then you speculated that, is it the age of the child? Why does there have to be any asking? Because they could certainly take you if they wanted to without your permission. But for some reason, they had to present to themselves as something benign and fun and come with us. It's going to be a great play date, this recurring play date in outer space or on the ship. But they had to ask you. And then when you refused, that's when their mood soured. And they basically got fed up with asking you it. But at some point, yeah, you were wondering, like, why do you have to ask at all? And what are your thoughts on that?
I got all these letters from people. Of the 1,800 that I've had, there's a core of about 500 of those that are really very solid. It's not up to me to judge anyone's experience, but they sound solid to me. And it seems like people that have a one-on experience can just get taken. But people that are serially abducted as children seem to have that ask permission as a factor in that. Other thing that's interesting is one of the things I noted in common, and matter of fact, what I did was when people told me that they thought that they'd been abducted from an early age, I would ask them, did you have a strange dream that you experienced as a child that is as vivid in your mind today as it was the day that you had it? And if they wrote to me and said, yes, I had this dream at age 5, and I still can't get this dream out of my head. And I would ask them a couple of questions and say, well, can you tell me what you got for Christmas that year? Can you tell me where your family went on vacation? Can you tell me 2 people that were at your birthday party that weren't related to you? And they can't answer any of those questions, or maybe 1 or 2, but the point is that they all have this weird dream that stayed with them throughout a lifetime. Those tend to be people that I see that tell me that they've been serially abducted.
And there seems to be a familial connection. And this I wondered as well, because you, in a section of the book, talk about your other relatives, as you did at the beginning of the show, being from northern Arkansas, which, of course, is in the region of Devil's Den. Is there, other than your cousin, who unfortunately couldn't handle it at some point, is there, do you think, a familial connection, and is that related to DNA strains or something having to do with you being part of a family or the same gene pool or whatever it is? Because that seems to come up a lot, and that family members are taken or parents had the same experience and then their children eventually experience something like that. But your siblings didn't seem to. They didn't know what you were talking about. They didn't want to read the book, or your eldest sister did not want to read the book.
Yeah, my eldest sister did not want to read the book, did not want to be part of the conversation. My sister in the middle, I told her about the book in 2018 and said, look, I wrote this. I don't know if you remember this stuff. I mean, you grew up just across the hall from my room, and I know that you heard me screaming my head off. Can we talk about that? And she got angry, and she said, I remember the lights coming through the window and we couldn't find you in the house. I don't want to talk about it any further. So
that's struck a chord with me, because obviously they weren't totally zapped out cold and just sleeping. That line to me says that they knew something weird was happening outside. They saw the lights coming through the windows, probably illuminated the house a bit. They went to look for you. You weren't in the house. That usually causes a great deal of alarm with a family. So they were conscious for part of it. But it doesn't seem like they talked about it or dealt with it, because it must have happened several times, do you think?
Yeah, I think it happened more than once. You know what else I think? And this is just conjecture. I don't know. I think they had their turns too.
I think one of the things that's conveyed really well in The Reckoning is just how much fear you were dealing with. And I guess a certain amount of inaptitude to defend yourself. Your parents weren't fully on board. So you got into this whole experience where you went and got your father's firearm. You were out in the park with, this just, as a father of a 12-year-old, this just scared me to death. You're out in the park, you discharged the weapon and quickly realized that that was a mistake. That story is just amazing. People should read the book. There's a little bit of levity to the idea of it, like, thank God you didn't get hurt, nothing happened. But I think what it conveys is just how upset you were about these monkey men continually coming. You've got to deal with it. You're trying to find a defense, and your idea is like, I'm going to shoot them. When they come, I'm going to shoot them, and I'm going to protect myself. But then once you went through this experience with the firearm and it didn't do what you thought it was going to do, you put that aside. And then the next thing you're dealing with is the bayonet and your friend Ernie. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Ernie and that crossover there, because he wouldn't come over to your house, right? Because he was so freaked out about it as well.
He would come over, but he wouldn't spend the night.
Wouldn't spend the night, right?
He wouldn't come for a sleepover. Yeah, Ernie and I were kind of opposites in a lot of ways, but we fit together real well. He went to a different school. We were the same age. And I don't know if we were 7 or 8. That line's blurry to me. But we met in the park and just were like best friends, from go. Rode our bikes together, did all the stuff you do as kids. I was candid with him, and I told him about I'm being harassed by these monkeys at night. And he didn't laugh. And I told him the whole story, and he was empathetic. And he says, how can I help? What can we do? And we were kind of like talking this over aloud. And he's like, what do you want to do? I said, I want to kill one. Nobody believes me. And if I kill one and it's dead on my floor of my room, there's your proof, right? I'm like a 7-year-old. And I think that anybody that has a child who doesn't think that kids go through their stuff is delusional.
Delusional, yeah. Your dad wasn't keeping it armed, but you knew where the bullets were and you knew where the weapon was.
Sure. Behind the bed in a place you'd never expect. There was this little cubby hole like thing in the backboard of the bed, and it was right there, along with a flashlight. I said, well, I'm going to put this under my pillow, and I'm going to shoot these things next time they come. And Ernie's like, how do you know how to shoot it? How do you know if you're going to miss? And I'm like, well, good point, right? So we agreed to meet one morning early at the park, about a block away from my house. And Ernie brought targets. He went through all the trouble of taking cardboard and drawing these targets with figures on them. And we did it in the early morning because I didn't like the night so much. So we did it like 6:30 a.m. We set these targets up at the base of these huge sycamore trees. And I got the gun out, and it was, I had played with my toy pistol when I was a kid, but I didn't realize how hefty, how much big piece of machined metal is in your hand. And Ernie was insistent that I take the safety off. Of course, neither one of us knew that double action revolvers don't have safeties. None of them do, never have. You pull the trigger and they go bang. So we engaged in this back and forth tug of war. I've got a hold of the gun. He's got a hold of the gun. He's pulling, I'm pulling. And somewhere along the way, the thing discharges. Scares us because we'd heard guns go off on television before. And we thought that would be the decibel level of what to expect. It was a complete shock. And we stood there for a minute. And I'm like, am I okay? Are you okay? By the grace of God, neither one of us was shot. I don't know where that bullet went. It went somewhere, 700 feet per second.
Yeah.
So I told Ernie, I said, I don't think this is a good idea. We're going to have to come up with a plan B. But I think it speaks to my level of frustration. And that stayed with me. I listened to my kids, and I was never quick to dismiss whatever they say.
Yeah, because it's sad that you got to that point where you're like, okay, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And, you haven't developed all your critical reasoning skills yet. You're just trying to bring a close to this nightmare situation that won't stop. It really conveys how vulnerable you felt and defenseless. And I think that comes through when you tell that part of the story.
Yeah, Ernie was my best friend at the time. That was my first introduction to grief, really. He drowned that summer at Lake of the Ozarks.
Oh, my goodness.
That was a big loss.
Sure.
There does seem to be, of course, kids, there's a special bond there because once you get older, of course, you're rational, you're more sophisticated. These things are nonsense. As your dad said, nothing in the sky can hurt you. There's no real monsters. But to a kid, they know better. There are monsters. And adults know that too, but of course, they can't admit that, not to other adults anyway. So there is a common bond between kids. Then there's parents. Well, Scott and I talk about this a lot, and it's one of my favorite scenes, and I'm glad he brought it up a few episodes ago, and I can't remember exactly what, but it comes from the Andy Griffith Show, and it was an episode called Mr. McBeevy, And I just love this because, Andy Griffith's the gentle dad who's full of common sense. He's a pillar of good moral judgment. And so is Opie, and he's just a little boy. But one day, the story goes that Opie is walking along the road, and he sees a guy in the treetops. And he comes home and describes him as he's wearing a silver hat, and he has 12 extra hands, and he blows smoke from his ears. And he jingles when he walks, as if he had like rings on his fingers and bells on his toes. But other than that, he's kind of normal. And he tells Andy and Barney and, of course, everybody, and nobody really believes him the way he describes it. Of course, once you see who it really is, it is a real guy. He happens to be a telephone line repairman. And he has the silver hard hat. And he has tools hanging off his belt that jingle. And he walks in the trees.
Yes, and he can do a trick where he would blow smoke into his hand and put it out of his ear, hold it up to his ear, like just a classic entertain the kid trick.
Sure.
Right. And that leads back to you talking about being prosecutor and having to hear these horrible crimes. And as Judge Judy said, if it doesn't make sense, if there's no reason to it, it can't be true. But we're not understanding the point of view of reason, in that everything that was described is accurate. It's just that we're not seeing it in the same context of a little boy. And this is what I loved about the exchange, in that Barney and Andy are talking, and Barney says, well, yeah, but to Andy, how can you explain it all? And Andy says, well, I can't. And Barney says, well, do you believe in Mr. McBeevy? The character in the tree says, no, but I do believe in Opie. And that just really touches me in that.
Great line.
Yeah, it's just that I don't know what he saw, but I know my son doesn't lie. I know he's a good boy. If he saw something like that, it's got to be something similar that we're just not comprehending yet. So in any case, a little aside there, but this leads me to wondering about the other children that you saw once you were taken aboard in kind of that round circular room, which was basically like a daycare, but seemingly with a different purpose. And you may not have the answer for this, but that's where you first meet Sue, what you described later as some sort of alien human hybrid, more human-like, with possibly Asian features that reminded you of your neighbor. I'm giving a little backstory here for people who hadn't read Incident at Devil's Den first. She's described in that book, but it reminded you of your old neighbor, who was a kind woman who was a widower living by herself. And that was probably the closest thing to what she looked like that you could comprehend. But she was kind of in charge of this daycare of other kids that have also been abducted, where the monkeys took you for playtime. So my question is, did you have any kind of idea why you were collected and what these playtime get-togethers were all about? Sue had you put together these what looked like colored tiles, or either dominoes or mahjong tiles, something like that were colored. And again, describing it for our listeners, you had to put them in certain order. There were little tasks with it, and she was encouraging if you didn't do well, or you were kind of rewarded if you did well and put them together the way you're supposed to. And the reward, which I couldn't understand, is she slid open a panel. It was like you could see stars or pinpoints of light. And it didn't make sense to me. It's like, well, wouldn't a reward be a treat? But you were not fed anything there. There was no ice cream, no beverages. That was your reward, is just to see this panel with the pinpoints of light, which you thought might be stars. What do you think was the purpose of those playtimes and what that reward was?
The purpose I would really love to know. I can tell you this, I had no less than 30 people write to me and say, oh yeah, I was in that room. As a matter of fact, there's a new author out. Her name is Deb Kauble, Kauble.
We're hoping to interview her sometime in the future.
She's an amazing woman.
Okay.
I'm a member of Von Smith's Serial Group. I live in Dallas. They have events in LA every now and then, a Christmas party every year. I try to fly out every year. We sat together and had dinner in 2019. She's like, they took you as a kid, huh? I said, yeah. She said, yeah, they took me too. And I didn't put this in the first book. She says, did they have you try to move stuff with your mind? And I'm like, yeah, I had a little blue cube. And she's like, yeah, I had I forget, pyramid, I think. What color was yours? Mine was blue. What color was yours? Mine was red. She describes the exact same identical experience that I hadn't published or said to anyone. And that was, we were sitting like cross-legged on the floor with this cube or this object in front of us. Everybody had something different. And the weird thing was, well, I should mention too, everyone communicates telepathic, which I think works great for kids. I don't think it would work well for adults, but for kids, it worked great. And the second thing was these objects that they give us, Sue would give us to move with our minds. This thing had no mass. I mean, I could pick it up, I could let go of it, it would fall to the ground. But when I picked it up, it didn't weigh anything. And I sat it down in front of me, and we were supposed to concentrate on it and make it move. And I was getting really frustrated that I couldn't make mine because the other kids were doing it. And one day I did it and it moved. I mean, it kind of flew across the room like 4 feet. And Sue came over and gave me high praise, rubbed my back, and oh my gosh, you did such a good job. Deb had the exact same experience. Yeah, you should have Deb on. You really should. She's an amazing woman. You'll like her.
Do you think that there's any kind of residual telepathy that happens with abductees? Because that was also an interesting instance. I think you talk about being in a bookstore with your wife. She's off shopping. You're looking at the half-price bookshelf, and a kind of a disheveled woman in her 60s comes up to you and says, "You're one of them, aren't you? They took you as a kid, didn't they?"
That's right.
And she's obviously doesn't look like, an alien human hybrid, a very normal looking woman. How do you think she knew that?
I have no idea, but I'd sure love to know. This was at Barnes & Noble in Chicago near Christmas time. And I'm at the half-price book rack because I'm cheap. And, she comes in and she's wearing the cheap glasses and she looks maybe homeless. She walked up to me, we made eye contact, and she says, "You're one of them. We used to take you when you were a little boy." I was stunned, and I'm like, "Ma'am, how do you know that?" And she just turned around and walked away, and she's gone in the crowd. I don't get that. The question, what were they taking us? What were they doing to us? Were they training us for something? I don't know. I don't have a clue.
Did your parents have any experiences? And also, did you ever tell them about the incident with the gun? Or
Oh, no. Good Lord, no.
Yeah, never.
Yeah.
They never found that out their whole lives.
Never found that out the whole lives.
Okay, and so what about, did you, when these things were going on, was there ever any indication from either of your parents that they, growing up, that they had any kinds of experiences?
My folks were kind of simple people. They grew up on a farm in northern Arkansas. My dad dropped out of school in the 8th grade and drove a truck for a living. My mother dropped out of school in the 8th grade, although she did go back and get her GED at age 60. I was very proud of her for that. So there was a little less level of sophistication. I was never really sure how to bring up the subject. Now, my dad was absolutely just really, really interested in UFOs. I mean, if we were watching television and there was a news story about a UFO in Cleveland or something, he would, immediately, "Everybody shut up, I want to hear this." And if there was something outside or something unusual, he'd be all over it. But when you ask him, are those flying saucers? No, that's stuff from the Soviets. That's all misinformation from the Soviets. So no, I think he knew. I think he knew at some level that there was something there, but didn't want to admit it, at least not to me, not to his children. I don't know of anyone else in the family that had any experiences, because again, we were kind of isolated in St. Louis. The only relatives we really saw were my grandparents once or twice, and my aunt and uncle that were Gerald's parents.
And they took it a lot differently, of course, being fundamentally religious, the way they deal with it. And you still see, I was thinking about this morning, that is another line of thought with a lot of researchers, is that there is a religious, spiritual, and demonic angle to ETs, aliens, and their agenda, and that what people might be seeing when they get abducted is some kind of a demonic influence or interaction or spirit oppression. Anybody come to you with that hypothesis?
Well, I've heard a couple people say they're demonic, this and that, but the only person I thought that was very credible was one person from To the Stars Academy who came to visit me in 2018. It was not Lou Elizondo, who I'm very candid about visiting me, but this person, and I promised not to use his name. He was very kind to me. I won't use his name. But he said to me, he says, there's a spiritual element to all this. And I said, no, I've never seen that. I've kind of rebelled against the idea, actually. I see it as Newtonian physics, kind of a materialistic kind of way. And he's like, no, he says, well, everybody has their own. But this was a very well-educated, very intelligent man. He had an experience that was so profound that he ended up in his spare time completing a master's in divinity. Now, the second person, there is a second person who's very credible. His name is Chris Bledsoe. And Chris Bledsoe, if you go online, there's an artist by the name of Doug Auld, A-L-U-D. And Doug Auld has a painting of the White Lady.
Oh, you mentioned him in your book.
Yes.
When you say painting of the White Lady, is that somebody like Sue? And just for our listeners to refresh their memories, Sue was the one who was very emotionally caring about you, seemed to be some kind of alien human hybrid, I guess she claimed herself, but was in charge of the daycare on board the ship, and also visited you later, which we're going to talk about here because that's going to lead to our mind-blowing finale, I guess, for this episode. But when you say the White Lady in the painting, is that something like that, or what was he talking about the White Lady?
Chris Bledsoe, Doug are friends. I don't think that's any secret. I'm not telling anything that you wouldn't want told. The White Lady was a vision by Chris Bledsoe.
One of the anecdotes at the end of the book, which is, by the way, for folks that you need to first get yourself a copy of Incident at Devil's Den. And I got to say, Terry, that thank you so much for mentioning us in the acknowledgements of your second book here, The Reckoning, and also for putting us in a caption. I don't think I've ever been captioned before. I got personal, huge thrills out of seeing our show and our names in print. So that was rare. And thank you so much for thinking of us. It's very generous of you.
Well, I really appreciate what you guys did. You guys found the campsite.
Yeah.
I mean, you found this spot. I mean, I thought it'd be covered with 40-year-old. And the fact that it's not covered with trees is huge.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a huge part of the story.
Scott's a bulldog about that. In fact, I task him when I go to build the webpage just to keep him occupied while he's pinging me like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Have him go investigate something on a map and anything with Google Earth, and he's on it like that. So, but I just thought, like, I'll bet we can find this place with the description of where they walked. And it turns out it wasn't overgrown. And if you do the Google Earth tilting, you can really see the elevation a little bit on that plateau.
Yes.
Yeah, and also, and when I first sent you those, Terry, remember too, we had, because Google Earth also has the historical satellite images, and you can hit that timeline and go back. So you can go back to the first, the images, the resolution isn't as good, but you can see that it was that way.
Yeah.
Way back in the 70s and 80s as well. It's like you said, it's been being maintained, like your landscaping.
Yeah, weirdly, it's being mowed for some unknown reason out in the middle of nowhere. But I was going to say, continuing on, the second thing people need to do, all of our listeners, well, as we said at the top of the show, we were just a little hesitant because we didn't know how people were going to react. We certainly don't want any blowback on yourself. Our listener base is mostly all very conscientious and decent people. Very few trolls. There are a few. But if they don't believe it, they're at least accepting of it. They'll listen to it. They may disagree and they'll tell us so, but they're accepting of it. So we didn't know how it played out, but it's become one of our most popular shows, and one that when we do like informal polls of like, what's freaked you out the most out of all the Astonishing Legends episodes, our base of listeners will usually say things like, well, it's shadow people, it's the black-eyed kids, and it's Terry Lovelace. Because when you think about it, not to go too much of a tangent, but Scott and I always wonder, like, well, what's really scary for Halloween? What ideas and stories can we tell, and that are really going to give people their money's worth for the spooky season? And over the years, we've developed kind of a philosophy about it, and that, I've said this before in the show, it's some things will scare people in that if it's a haunted house or a haunted location, or maybe the site of something horrific happening, but usually a haunted location, people say, well, that's very scary. That place it's spooky and creepy, but I don't have to worry about it because I'll never go there. Or in Scott's case, we may never go back to Sally House. People won't go back to Greyfriars Kirkyard. Just the philosophy of it and the psychology of it. What scares people in that it is a horror or a torment that you don't have to go to. It comes to you. And so there you have the idea of the black-eyed kids. They'd show up wherever, and it doesn't matter where you are. You could be in a gated community. Somehow they show up. And also abduction. It just comes to you. It finds you. If for some reason you're somehow slated to be chosen, it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that scares people to the core. Anyway, so I want to get that in. But yeah, the second thing that people need to do is pick this book up, Devil's Den, The Reckoning. because not only do you get updates on everything we've talked about in the first interview, which was fascinating and a great recap, and it leads to some mind-blowing conclusions, but there's also the second half of the book are just super compelling and interesting and disturbing and some uplifting stories from people who have emailed you their stories and want their tales to be told. And just, yeah, if you like this kind of thing or you're fascinated by it, it's really a treasure trove. And that's the other half of the book. The latter half of the book are these stories from people that will just make you scratch your head and just wonder what is going on out there.
It's very humbling. I'll tell you, it's a privilege to have somebody share this information. A lot of people wrote to me and said, I've never shared this with another human being. So I really appreciate that. And there are some cool stories there. I did everything I could to vet these stories, including telephone conferences and
when you get these stories emailed to you, and certainly we do all the time, so many that we'll try and read each one, skim them, and some of them are you don't even know what to say or respond with. But when you get stories like that, I was noticing in the book you said, yeah, some of them seem to be more credible than others. Some you try to vet, and you can do that better than some other stories or people that tell them. But when you get a story, what makes you believe it or not believe it?
Great question. I love it. I'm kind of a data guy. I'm not as good as David Paulides, but I kind of keep track of these things. And that's why I say I got a core of about 500 that are just really, really good. One of the commonalities that I see among stories that I think are particularly good is the disclaimer in the first paragraph. People will start, and I bet money you've seen this, people will start with, please don't think I'm crazy. I wasn't drinking at the time. I didn't do drugs. And it seems like it's always that first paragraph. And then they go off and they tell me the most amazing stories. And then they say, thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty much our template as well when we get them. I would say for myself, and it's not to put anybody down, but the times that I've heard a story that I was suspicious about, let's say, were ones that are not so much UFO encounters, and I don't think we've had an abduction story emailed to us yet, not one that I can remember, or one that was specifically about abduction. But the ones that are usually ghost stories, and it's a little bit too fantastical. In that the third time I called out to the ventriloquist dummy, and then it animated itself, and it's like, okay, that's a little beyond what we usually hear or experience ourselves from people we think are credible. It's too much. Now, having said that, when you hear some of these stories or if you pick up Devil's Den: The Reckoning, and you get to the second half of the book and you hear all these accounts, I think the ones you've chosen are excellent. And they're just something that it's outrageous in another way and not a fictional way where somebody, like I said, I get suspicious when it seems like somebody's trying to embellish a story because they think that's really going to grab you, that the crazier it is, it's going to be more believable. But if you've studied a little bit of the paranormal, you'll know that that doesn't usually happen. It's not like you see in the movies where it's something crazy. On the other hand, when you read these stories, they're just so weird. And it goes back to a case that I don't want to describe here on the show because it is pretty sensitive, but it happens to be about the abuse of a young girl who tells this kind of outrageous tale. And you think, like, she's making this up. A jury's not going to buy this. And then, like Mr. McBeevy, you come back to find out what really happened and the adults involved. And it's like, yeah, she described it exactly, pretty much as truthfully as she saw it, and it was true. But you didn't have the context for it. So with these stories that people tell you about, they're some of the most outrageous things that if you put in a movie, people would say, oh, come on, that's baloney. You're making this up. If it was a ghost story, they're ready to believe it. UFOs, they're not going to make that leap. Or in this, it's like, it's just so weird. And the details are so, not fantastical, but just bizarre, that it is high strangeness, but it's cohesive and it makes sense. That those, to me, ring true.
Yeah, to me, there's a thread of empathy in there, too. I mean, I felt there were things I said in The Reckoning I didn't say in Incident at Devil's Den because I thought, people, it's just too much. It's just too much. Most of these stories start off with kind of just a broad, this is what happened. And then when I email them back, I get more details. Then I get a cohesive story that makes sense. And it's a privilege.
Hey, how's that Bluetooth speaker you got from Bespoke Post for your convertible treating you?
You know what? It sounds so good and it's so convenient. I think I might wait a while longer to get the OEM radio fixed.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing how big of a sound you can get out of them. And Bespoke Post always goes to great lengths to source the best items at great prices. But their secret isn't just top-notch gear, because you start off taking a quiz at boxofawesome.com, and your answers help them pick the right box of awesome for you. So you're bound to get something that fits your style and your budget, and a great gift to yourself that you can really use.
That's certainly been our experience. And now we're excited because Bespoke Post's fall and winter lineup has the most awesome boxes of seasonal must-have goods to help you live your best life.
Well, thank you, Oprah. Look, you're not wrong, because Bespoke Post has a lot of our favorite things. I really love the Flickr personal cement fireplace that comes with the flame box. Have you seen that?
No, not yet.
Well, Bespoke Post has got any taste covered, no matter what you're into. From autumn craft beers to cozy threads, clothing, and camping gear essentials, Box of Awesome has collections for every part of your life. And it's such a fun rabbit hole just to browse all the stuff on their website.
They have really popular collections for women, too. Like some things that are trending are the Dulce box with a Mexican-inspired traditional hot chocolate setup, or the Nocturne Clutch with a bottle of Caswell Massey Eau de Toilette in the After Hours box.
Nice. Well, you can't really go wrong with any of it for yourself or as a unique gift for someone special. And to get started, take the quiz at boxofawesome.com. And they release new boxes every month across a ton of different categories.
It's free to sign up, and you can skip a month or cancel at any time.
Each box only costs $45, but has over $70 worth of gear inside.
Plus, with each Box of Awesome, you're supporting small business. 90% of everything that comes in your Box of Awesome is from a small, up-and-coming brand.
Get 20% off your first monthly box when you sign up at boxofawesome.com and enter the code AL at checkout.
That's boxofawesome.com, code AL, for 20% off your first box. Okay, here's something I've been wondering for a while. Do you have any banking horror stories?
About banking? Well, as a matter of fact, I do. Oh, yeah. So once when I was looking for a new apartment, I found one that I thought was pretty cool. But after handing over a hefty personal check, remember those?
Oh, yeah.
To the overly cranky landlord for a deposit, I started really thinking about all the downsides of the place. So the next day I called my bank to place a stop payment order on the check. And it took about 30 minutes, but then the customer service rep said finally, well, don't worry, the hold has been placed on that check. Not. It turns out the landlord had gone to the bank right when it opened and deposited the check. So I called the bank and asked what the deal was. You guys confirmed that the check was held. And all they said was, oops, I guess the person handling your call didn't actually do it. So then I asked, okay, since you guys made the mistake, how am I going to get my money back? And their response was, maybe you can ask them for the money back. I was like, that's your answer?
Oh my God. So how'd it work out?
Well, to get most of my money back, I had to go meet the landlord in a restaurant parking lot to get cash. And that was like a spy exchange at Checkpoint Charlie. So yeah, terrible customer service, but we didn't have many options back in the olden days.
Well, that wouldn't have happened if you'd have had the Current banking app.
Well, of course not, but I'm sure no one back then could even conceive of managing your money right on your phone with something like Current. We love that Current lets you pay or request money, pay your bills, add, transfer, or withdraw cash, and you can even set up direct deposit and easily create savings goals. So with Current, you are in charge of your money, not some forgetful big bank rep.
Yeah, and if you want cash, there are no fees at over 40,000 in-network all-point ATMs in the U.S. Your money is always literally at your fingertips with Current.
And listen up, it's your last chance to be a part of our Current giveaway.
We've partnered with Current to give away $1,000 to our listeners. Current is going to give away $250 to 4 listeners of our show.
And all you have to do is download the Current app and enter our code AL during sign-up for a chance to win. That's AL during sign-up. The giveaway closes soon on November 30th, 2021, so sign up now before it's too late.
Download the Current app, sign up in less than 2 minutes, and enter code AL for a chance to win.
Visit current.com/AL for full terms and conditions.
Hi, I'm Jack. When I'm not going down Wikipedia rabbit holes, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Well, let's maybe steer the conversation back, I guess, leading up to the most, significant conclusions and implications here. And that is what's going on with the ET presence itself, which we talked about a lot in our first interview with you. But in this case, some of the beings and the more detailed descriptions I found really interesting and made connections with, like, again, talking about Sue, who was the leader of the alien daycare, if you want to call it that, seemed to have an assistant who was Jenny, who had all white eyes, completely
just
white.
Just the opposite from the black-eyed kids. There was nothing but sclera. And when I remember her face, I never remember it clearly. It's always kind of blurred. And, she was in and out of, the dress that she wore was not of this era. I mean, it was what little girls wore in the 40s or something. And then the white socks and she was creepy. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, that is a connection that I make. Like you said, that's a total description of a black-eyed kid as often being wearing dress that is not contemporary, not of the era, 50 years too old, and showing up and not knowing current terminology. Scott and I are one of our favorite lines from David Weatherly's book is when a pair of kids show up, and a lot of times they ask to use the telephone, and that's how they gain access and entry into your place. And again, that involves permission to come inside, and you have to give it to them. Otherwise, they don't seem to enter. But once you do, they're really hard to get rid of, and then you end up with like a bunch of post-traumatic side effects, bad luck, all kinds of things happening to you if you do. That's been reported. But a pair of kids came to the door and asked to use the telegraph. Maybe we use your telegraph. You need to let us in. You have to let us in. We need to use that telegraph. And it's like, what? Are you joking? But they don't seem to know what time they're in. Another case where this also happened in Texas, that's in his book. These two kids show up and as a guy is carting groceries from his truck into the house, and they said, is it food time yet? If it's food time, you need to let us in. And it's like, who says food time?
Nobody says food time.
No, it's like they have an idea that's vague. Maybe they got it in an alien pamphlet. So you'll find yourself on Earth. Here's how to behave. And it's not totally correct. But they had the all black eyes. The one anecdote I remember was a character with all white eyes. And Scott, refresh my memory here. It was a case where I think somebody saw a black-eyed person or kid and got a horrible bad chill, very bad juju about that. And then a person with all white eyes shows up, and it looks like they are there to corral the black-eyed person.
Oh, that was in one of the stories. Yeah. I remember that, but I can't remember.
Yeah, totally evident of like the black-eyed being bad, the white-eyed person or creature showing up to chase down or corral or arrest maybe the black-eyed person, but the second person had all white eyes, no pupils.
It's amazing.
It just makes you wonder, what's the connection there to anything kind of spiritual or ET? But what was then Jenny's purpose if Sue was so affectionate and caring and understanding and compassionate, but Jenny was really a blank slate and creepy and with the all white eyes? You maybe alluded to that maybe she was an assistant of some kind.
But we never saw her do a thing. I don't recall her ever doing a thing. She carried a jump rope. I never saw her jump rope. She carried a jump rope with her. And she was just there.
Wow. So, Terry, one aspect I think I may have glossed over in asking you about, what do you think the panel with the lights behind it represented? The thought that came to me was that it was some kind of psychogenic stimulant or something that, well, you got this puzzle right. Here's your reward. She slides the shade back and you see these pinpoints of light. But you didn't say they seem to be stars or anything. That
no,
it was.
I mean, they didn't twinkle
right.
Like stars do. I mean, I'm a child. I don't know. I thought it was like some type of display. I thought it was something that was manufactured. But then later on, as an adult, I think I realized that where we were in this domed room was probably not on Earth. I think we were transported to some ship that was somewhere, God knows where.
Right.
And I think that's the point she wanted us to know, maybe not then, but to know someday.
You will meet Sue later on as an adult in your life in several different instances. And I think she shows up, as you said, thanks for the memories, where she, as a gift for being their lab rat for a while, she lets you in on an episode that was basically a bit of a mystery to you, riding your motorcycle and experiencing missing time, which we covered your first interview.
Yeah, she sure did.
Did you notice before these encounters as an adult later on in life that she seemed to only have 4 long fingers?
I did, but I don't think I ever dwelled on it. The same way that she had a bulbous back to her head.
Right.
It was different, but it wasn't something I dwelled on. And I think I say this in the book, I hope I do, and that was that I had this odd affection for her.
Yes.
Not in a romantic way, but in a maternal way. I'm not sure where that comes from and what the purpose of that is.
Yeah.
Have you ever stopped to think that you might be biologically related?
I have. I mean, I got a DNA test that shows that my family's pretty much where they said they came from, Eastern European, nothing surprising.
Yeah.
And English, then Ireland, and to the United States. And
you didn't really talk about this in the second book here, but in the first one, it was a major component and something I thought was super compelling because you can see it as evidence. The implants that you had received that were under the skin without any breaks in the skin, they just appeared and then they disappeared. Did you ever get any more information about what those were for, other than possibly just obviously tracking you? What was the purpose of the implants? Did you find out more about that?
I think they were obviously to track me, like you said.
Right.
I really don't have a clue other than that. I've talked to so many people. I talked to Whitley Strieber, who's had implants like mine, and we're all left with that puzzle. I've never met anyone who could say, well, I know what that's all about. It's
right.
For this or that. I think tracking is probably spot on, but other than that, I don't have a clue.
Well, the reason I ask is that your case is significant, remarkable, and unique in that you got a lot of feedback, which most people don't in their cases. Usually it's just a mystery. They don't know what was done to them. They might have a physical ailment later on, but it remains more of a mystery other than the common tropes where sometimes women will be shown infants and not really told anything, but they get the impression that that was their baby that was implanted, and taken from them, and it's a hybrid. In your case, though, with the aid of Sue/Betty, and you could explain that she started with the goofy wig and the bulbous head, she looked more like Betty Rubble to you?
She did look like Betty Rubble. I mean, that was just a crazy thing that popped into my head.
Yeah.
But she hadn't aged a day. For some reason, I felt it appropriate to change her name to Betty.
Right.
I mean, I kind of differentiate Sue from the past and Betty from the present.
Well, let's talk about then, Sue, and as we wrap up here, your link to this knowledge and what is possibly going on with all of this, because that is the question. What's happening here? What's the purpose? What's the agenda? In that you think that because Sue/Betty is more of an intermediary and more empathetic to our human condition because she is half human, that she's allowed to tell you some things. Is that correct? Like she's allowed to tell you what some of the agendas are going on.
That is correct. And in the first book, I said there were some things that she told me that I wasn't going to discuss because I don't want to turn off the reader. I don't want them to say, oh, yeah, right. I mean, I think there's kind of a limit to what you can expect the reader to accept. And I felt like I didn't want to pass that threshold and ruin my credibility. But yeah, Sue revealed several things to me, and they're all on page 133.
Yeah, well, the four-finger description is something I've heard, and I think a lot of people who've studied UFO stories have heard before. Most significantly, I was watching an old documentary, shot an old video, 3/4-inch videotape, I think, where this artist had a friend who was an Army nurse, and she claimed that at this Army base, an alien was brought in, deceased, but brought in for an autopsy. And there was a sheet over it. And of course, there's high security, but an emergency team to, I think, either try and restore its life or perform an autopsy as soon as possible. She said she saw a hand slip out from under the sheet, and there were four very long fingers, no thumb. And then, of course, my thought was like, well, that doesn't make evolutionary sense. Your opposable thumb is built everything we know. But here's the interesting point. She said at the end of the fingers were tiny suction cups.
Yes.
Yeah, so something that you could grip with if you only had four fingers and no thumb.
I have a drawing that I made some years ago, and I think I know that story. I think that story goes back to Roswell, doesn't it?
Yeah, possibly. It was so long ago. I made notes and I can't remember it, but the gentleman that was on camera, he swears by it that, of course, his good friend, this Army nurse, had sworn that she saw this. And then the other thing is that when they did start cutting into it, the smell was so horrible, it drove all the doctors out for a minute before they could clear the air. So those are the two significant things I remember from that segment. But yeah, that image in my mind really stuck with the 4 long fingers that at first don't make sense. But if you can grip with those in some way, then yeah, you can accomplish what we can with 5 fingers.
Yeah. We're making a conclusion that 4 long fingers articulate the same way ours do. Theirs may be able to go backward or sideways, or who knows? I mean,
right.
Just conjecture, but.
Certainly. Well, let's talk a little bit about what Sue told you about physiology first as a kid, and then we'll lead into some of the more bombshell admissions she makes, which will all have us wondering. But you said that when you were younger, she was able to show you, you're talking about telepathy. I think this is the passage where she's trying to explain to you how advanced beings communicate, and that telepathy is, you don't need language. It comes before language. You can express things more clearly, and they're not lost in words or interpretation. It's more direct, it's more efficient, but you need to be advanced and in control of your mental faculties a lot more. I had a question here because it reminded me of something we've talked about before, and that she was able to show you a picture of the inside of your head from the top down.
That's right.
And you said that there's something in the kind of the center of your brain that looked like a bean.
That looked like a bean. That's right. And she says, that's where your thoughts originate.
Okay.
You know, this whole life from me asking her, why can't we talk like this at home?
Right.
And she says, you're not, because you're not ready. And I thought, oh boy, I can't wait till I'm 9. You know, I think she meant species-wise, we're not ready.
Well, I was going to ask you, has anybody mentioned to you or referenced the pineal gland?
Yes. Many people wrote to me and said that there's a pineal gland that's right in the center by the hippocampus. Yeah.
Of course, if you look it up on WebMD, and they'll just say, well, it produces melatonin. But I believe there's some theories that the ancients used to trepan your skull, cut a hole into it, pierce that with a long, thin metal rod or needle, which caused it to scar, and that gave you a little bit of telepathic powers.
But you know, this woman from Indiana sent me a bunch of pictures of bas reliefs done on rock and statues of men or women, I don't remember, holding what looked like a pine cone.
Mm.
And she said that that's actually pineal gland.
Right.
Maybe so, maybe not. I don't know.
What's interesting is we get to a conclusion here that Sue is letting you in on a lot of information. And what I loved about The Reckoning here is that you get some answers I desperately had after finishing Incident at Devil's Den. And where she lays down a lot of this knowledge, I believe was that in a trip to the dark side of the moon?
It was in 1987 when I was abducted from a motorcycle, when I had that period of missing time. She gave me that in October 2017. She gave me that memory back. Again, from a view from overhead of my bike being there. I'm standing next to my bike on this gravel road, middle of nowhere, 1,000 acres of corn. And I've got my helmet in my hand. And here's this disc over the cornfield to my left. And it just kind of floats over to the road and drops down to about 5 feet above the surface of the road. Then a ramp goes down. I have no fear. I'm like, oh, right on time. Here we go. And the door opened. I walked up the ramp. I met Betty, who I knew as Sue then. I didn't know her as Betty until 2017. This happened in 1987. And we sat together, and that's when we went to the dark side of the moon. And I know that's an awful hard thing to believe.
Well, the description it sounds just amazing. I mean, just to experience. But it was there though that she told you about the agreement as you list it in the book.
That's right. She said shortly before you were born, there was an agreement made. Because in the end of Incident at Devil's Den, I said there are 3 possibilities. Either we're working shoulder to shoulder in concert with them, or we're in a quid pro quo type relationship where they're giving us something in exchange for something, or they're here and they do what they want to do and we don't have any control over them whatsoever. And I think there's probably a 4th possibility, and that is there are 2 separate factions here at odds with one another, maybe each one seeking supremacy. I don't know, but yeah, supposedly there was an agreement shortly before my birth. I did some research on that, and there was a lot of people believe that Eisenhower had a daughter
Yeah, I've heard that.
Your daughter or granddaughter? I don't remember which.
Oh, it could be a granddaughter.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Who stated she knew that? She knew that as a fact. What generated the most email out of all of this was when I saw a mushroom-shaped building, which she said was 1.5 kilometers high, which is a little more than a mile.
Right.
Man, I got emails about that. I bet I got 50 emails from people who said, I know that building.
Oh, really?
I know that building.
That's interesting.
I have a businessman from Dallas, who I can't name, unfortunately, but businessman from Dallas said that he was just, as a kid, he was obsessed with drawing that. And he drew it as a child, and he knew it was from Mars when he was a kid.
Wow. Well, there's a couple things I want to quickly say about that because it ties in, and there's a bigger picture here. When you're describing this is basically in your trip to the moon on the other side of the dark side of the moon. There's basically a city laid out, a hodgepodge of buildings with no streets or roads, of course, but there's construction equipment. It looks like there's a mining operation, but a lot of buildings of different shapes and sizes, and one that is massive, nearly a mile high. And you were told by Betty, why don't you tell us what Betty explained what was going on the moon, because you did ask her, like, what's happening down there?
I did. I asked her who was here. And she told me that the moon is an artificial vessel. Mm-hmm. And she says, if you want proof of that, just look at the maps of the moon and look at the shallowness of the crater. She said, this is solid material underneath. And it was made long before there was mankind, been abandoned for some time. And then the reptilians took it over, and they're there now. And they're aggressive and territorial, according to her. But she said that there are humans there. They've been there a long time, and that many species of aliens come there. And she said they come there for the rocks. That's when she said helium-3. And I had to Google helium-3 to finally figure out what it was. She said it was something to do with energy, but helium-3 is a very rare thing on planet Earth, but on the moon it's plentiful. And there's a gas trapped inside these rocks. And they crush these rocks and extract the helium-3, and it can make fission or fusion, I'm not sure which, reactor, and there is no waste. There is no waste. I don't know what the output is, just something benign, water or oxygen or something. Nothing radioactive, nothing that can harm you. That'd be a pretty valuable thing to have.
Scott might know the figures here, but I've heard it thousands of times more expensive than diamonds, or pound for pound, and that it's 1 cubic yard would be worth $1 trillion here on Earth. There's some outrageous exchange figure, and that's how rare and valuable it is.
Real quick, I was just going to say, I'm just quickly looking it up while we're talking. This is a European Space Agency, just a paragraph and a search results return right here. Unlike Earth, which is protected by its magnetic field, the moon has been bombarded with large quantities of helium-3 by the solar wind. It is thought that this isotope could provide safer nuclear energy in a fusion reactor, since it is not radioactive and would not produce dangerous waste products. So that complies exactly with what you are describing, Terry, that you weren't even sure how to describe it, but this information that you're getting falls right in line with what we can search up about it right here on the internet right now.
Yeah.
So that kind of matches the uptick in activity to get to the moon. I mean, India, Japan, Russia, everybody wants to go to the moon.
Right. I just want to mention something to you. I briefly brought it up before we started recording, and we were just chatting, in that this also ties in with what I'd heard, I believe, in the first time I'd heard Lori Williams, our remote viewing sensei, or for Scott and I, protege of renowned remote viewer Lynn Buchanan, who was her mentor. We talk about her a lot on the show, but she was being interviewed by Connie Willis. And I bring this up. We were recording late one night when we were both living in the same town, listening to Coast to Coast, and I'd never heard of Lori before, but she starts laying out this story of what's on the dark side of the moon and on Mars. And it kind of blew my mind. Little I know, after reading her book, it would blow my mind a second time. But what she said, what's not her remote viewing, but I believe their upper echelon of advanced
Her
remote
black
viewers.
belts. She has like these team of amazing people. Yeah,
Exactly. That they had viewed on the moon, there are facilities there that are above ground, below ground. There is an abandoned or crashed ship, alien spaceship there. But below ground are several levels, and they can see people that look humanoid working and living there at these various levels. Some maybe look more human than others, but some are just kind of humanoid. The other interesting thing is that there's another race of aliens which are huge, massive, very large aliens, and they were indifferent to us. They don't want to interfere. They don't care about us at all. They're just there to mine whatever they're mining. And I didn't hear what at the time. And this would be now 4 or 5 years ago.
Lori shared this on Coast to Coast years and years ago.
Yeah. Just that there's another race that are there. They're doing their mining operations. And as long as we leave them alone, they won't annihilate us or bother with us. But we have some other alien-human cooperation going on the moon. What was viewed on Mars, this was not in your book or referenced, but it's probably connected. There were facilities underground that seemed very dormant, and there were humans or humanoids in a suspended animation underneath the surface of Mars, waiting for something or to be reactivated, or just even like Interstellar. You're just in a extended hypersleep until somebody comes and wakes you up. That's what they saw, along with a large...
Or the ship's computer killed you.
Yeah, the HAL.
2001.
Right.
Yeah.
That and there's an array of obelisks on Mars in a circle, which is meant to be some kind of antenna array. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that, see if you...
Well, I wish I knew something about Mars. I mean, it's a shame I can't contact her and see if she's taking questions. You know, I used a ghost box.
Mm-hmm.
A program on my phone. It's an app. It's cheap, $10 or something, called Necrophonics. I asked to speak to Betty. It was me and a friend who's a psychic here in Texas. She's very good. She said, "Why don't you ask to talk to Betty?" And I did. We were in a Zoom meeting. I saw an orb dart across my face. And at her house, there were orbs all over the place. We got, "Hi, Terry." I mean, nothing else of any substance, but I thought it was kind of cool.
What you were talking about with the moon and the cities on the moon and the trip to the moon and what we're about to talk about now, I can tell really stimulate people's imaginations, you could say, because in the Kindle edition, you can see what people have highlighted the most.
Oh, yeah.
And this is it. And it's under your reptilians and broken promises section here, or chapter. So basically, you've known this before. You've mentioned it in our first interview that there are several races of aliens. You have the insectoid, praying mantis type leaders, or the more advanced aliens.
The things I saw on the ship that had that medical vibe to them.
Right. But here's something that's extremely controversial, and people roll their eyes and tear their hair out when they hear reptilian aliens, because it's become such a joke, meme, and trope. Also, it has to do with the people who promote that agenda or that conspiracy theory that they're replacing our world leaders. But in your experience, Betty informed you about what their agenda really is and if they exist.
She gave me 4 revelations. Before my experiences with Betty since 2017, I would have thought these were all just conspiratorial, but based on our conversation, and I think I back it up with other, because Reptilians and Broken Promises this is in that same chapter. I failed to grasp the enormity of her statements at the time. She had just confirmed, 1, the existence of a secret space program. She said the Apollo missions were public face, a nation face for the space program, and there is a separate secret space program. 2, that extraterrestrials and human beings live on and inside the moon. 3, that extraterrestrials reside inside the Earth, and some have free reign to abduct cattle and humans by written agreement. And then 4th, she inferred the existence of some kind of global ruling council. I hate the word cabal. I don't use it.
Right.
But that's conspiratorial in and of itself, the existence of some ruling global council. And I use the word inference because she doesn't come out and say that, but she infers that strings are being pulled somewhere.
Yeah, the biggest sci-fi ideas ever, and she's telling you that it's true.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that I just typed up right from the book. It's just, again, this is the bookend here, the circling back to the early part of cattle mutilations and that idea happening, and possibly people in the missing 411 only coming back in small pieces or disappearing completely. As you said here in the book, that Betty further stated, this is a longer version of one of your points here. It just chills me. Reptilian entities live in your western desert and have since before man evolved into intelligent beings. Reptilians feed on the blood from cattle and will feed on human blood and tissue as well. Your government has a treaty that limits the number of human beings and the number of cattle that the reptilians can take. The reptilians have no obligation to return them or agreement as to their ethical treatment. Since the mid-1960s, they have failed to honor the agreed limits. What limitation, you asked her? Limits the number of humans that may be lawfully harvested. Likewise, the number of cattle from private ranches and federal land is limited according to the conditions in the Eisenhower Accord. Look, I hope there's a global unity that's part of a galactic federation that's keeping us in harmony with our alien neighbors, but this part here is chilling and disturbing above all else.
It is. 2 months after my book was out, my phone rang and it was Linda Moulton Howe. And we talked for 3 hours. Get her on your show and ask her opinion.
Yeah, we're going to tie this all in, I think, with other interviews as we go along to give ourselves some time to digest this info.
You know, it was interesting. You used the word sci-fi. You know, I was researching the hollow moon thing. You know, there was a book written in 1901 by H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
Called The First Men in the Moon. And it talks about a species of insectoids that live inside the moon. The moon's a hollow vessel. Crazy. I mean, written in 1901. So crazy ideas come from somewhere.
Exactly. And that's the point I was just about to make, is that I believe ideas are out there. It's hard to prove, of course, but you wonder why Leonardo da Vinci, if he did, now it's contentious that he was the originator of a lot of the fantastical ideas for flying machines and whatnot. But it's out there. These ideas are out there. Somehow we're tapping in. We hear this constantly. We hear this with Stephen King. He must know something that he's not telling us about, but they resonate so deeply with people that it makes people wonder, makes the readers wonder, like, where are you getting these ideas? And here, then, now it seems like there's some agency that is outside of us, that exists outside of our sphere of understanding and reality, that may be influencing the ideas we do get. Certainly, you're one of the most credible guests we've ever had, which is why we love talking with you, having you back on. And what the implications here are is it's earth-shattering, and possibly literally.
I think so, too. And, you know, it's a lot to swallow. I mean, I don't say, this is what I was told. Could I have been lied to? Sure. Could I be manipulated? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think so. For what that's worth, I don't think so.
That's going to wrap up part 1 of our 2-part series with Terry Lovelace on his new book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning. A very special thanks to Terry for joining us again. We'll be back in 2 weeks with part 2.
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. Thank you.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees Wendell and Brandon Schexnader. The show is co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also our head of research.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane, and our sound design and additional composing is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the Astonishing Research Corps.
But most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
You can also support the show at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.